I cannot claim perfection like any other country in the world, but torture is against our constitution, is against Islam, is against the policy of the government.
Here, in the notorious Evin prison, which we could only photograph secretly from our hotel window. Badabi says he spent 17 months in solitary confinement, trapped in a tiny cell not much bigger than a bathtub.
They took me to a special prison for intelligence, and I was in solitary confinement for several months.
It might be the most difficult part of prison, to be in solitary confinement. You know, in the Quran, Allah says that one of the punishments for sinners is to contract their graves, to make their graves smaller. When you're in solitary confinement, you just see the walls approaching each other and they're becoming smaller. And it's as if you're in a grave. It was just, and you start to hallucinate after a while. Because some people, they had to spend their, 3-4 years in solitary confinement in the Islamic Republic.
I was in solitary confinement in the beginning for 2 weeks, and then I was put with other prisoners.
اولا 2 هفته من تو انفرادی بودم و بعدش آوردن منو بیرون و پیش 2 تا 3 تا 4 تا خانم بودم توی اتاق ولی هی عوض می شدن.
They are masters of psychological torture. They know exactly what to do.
تحت فشار روحی و روانی شدید بودم که به من میگفتن که اگه اعتراف نکنید که جاسوس هستید میتونید 10 سال اینجا بمونید یا 20 سال یا حتی اعدام میتونید بشید.
24 ساعت روشنه.
They kept the light on 24 hours a day. You have no information about the outside. You have no contact with the outside. And after a while, you become mentally disoriented. This kind of torture doesn't affect you physically, but it does affect you mentally and emotionally.
Over subsequent days, I was interrogated several hours a day. You're blindfolded and you sit facing a wall, and there are up to 3 or 4 men who interrogate you, asking you questions. I confessed to being a U.S. spy. I thought I had to do this to be free.
They kicked me in the teeth and broke them. There was a toilet that was stopped up with feces. They put my head into the toilet.
And they beat you with cables?
Yes. On the bottom of my feet and my back.
I read that they beat your testicles? And how long would this go on for?
This happened the whole time I was in solitary confinement. It also happened at other times.
They also used sleep deprivation against you, kept you up day and night?
Yes.
And they hung you from the ceiling with your hands tied behind your back?
At least 5 or 6 times they did this.
Badabi told us he never knew which days he'd be tortured or which technique they'd use. Once, he says, they cut him and rubbed salt in his wounds.
I hadn't slept for maybe 72 hours. I couldn't think clearly. I was drooling. I wanted to sleep, but they would slap me to keep me awake. In the final hours, when even the slapping wouldn't keep me up, they cut my arms and hands and put salt in my wounds so the burning would keep me awake.
I was so relieved that, Secretary of State is talking about me.
It was mainly because of the international campaign for me and because of the international pressure, but also because of the internal pressure.
He lives in Washington now, trying to make sure that the others still in prison are not forgotten. Do you feel free now?
No, I don't feel free. I have a responsibility to the people imprisoned in Iran whose human rights are being violated. I have to get their message out. And it's a big responsibility that doesn't leave one free. But to an extent, I do feel free. I live in a free country, and I've left prison.
So your body is free, but your heart is not?
That's exactly the way it is.